perhaps, Andrew, you could get us started and talk about the expansion of the ferry service into Long Island City?
So I think to get started, I think it's a good idea to mention that I was born and raised in Queens.
Oh, great.
A graduate of Jamaica High School, so a little bit to the east of Long Island City. And coming here, my mother and most importantly, my mother-in-law still live in Queens. And coming here reminds me very much that I've got to put the air conditioner in my mother-in-law's window. That's more important than anything else. So, but I also, at EDC, I have the great privilege of leading a group that has been working on a citywide ferry program that includes Long Island City. In 2015, or earlier this year, in his State of the City address, Mayor de Blasio announced a citywide ferry strategy, and the goal is really to introduce ferry service throughout the city to increase, this convenient transportation mode to neighborhoods that really have transit gaps. And we have transit gaps because this is an expanding city. It's a great story. Our population is growing. Areas along the waterfront are developing, and one of the things that we don't have is great connections, great transit connections in those areas. So the goal of this is, in the first phase, which will begin in 2017, is to add ferry service to communities like Astoria, over by the Astoria houses and Hallett's Point in that area. Long Island City North, with connections to the new campus on Roosevelt Island for Cornell. I'm also a Cornell graduate, but I'll just throw that in gratuitously. So very happy about all that. And of course with connections to Manhattan, to Lower Manhattan and to Midtown. There will also be a new ferry line to South Brooklyn that'll connect those neighborhoods, and one out to the Rockaways. The second phase, which will be implemented in 2018, will include new ferry routes to Soundview in the Bronx and to the Lower East Side, Manhattan. So sort of complete the whole East River system in a nice way. And so in total, there's 10 new ferry landings planned. Those are in addition to the existing ones, so 21 new landing spots around the city. That's 5 new routes connecting 12 waterfront communities all throughout that East River corridor. And one of the things that I do want to stress with this panel is that we don't see ferries as not the silver bullet. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it is a nice addition to the transit system in New York City. And it's not going to substitute for the volumes of people that we move by subways and buses, but make no mistake, this is a total transit system with regularly scheduled service, similar to what people are enjoying now on the East River, and have always enjoyed in Long Island City, because one of the earliest stops in our system was Hunters Point South. That goes back to the early 1990s. So Long Island City was ahead of the game, with respect to ferry service. So what we envision really is the ability to connect neighborhoods in northern Queens to other parts of the city. So think about someone from Astoria Houses who has a job in Midtown Manhattan, saving a 15 or 20-minute walk to the subway instead, just falling out of bed and hopping onto a subway, and at the same cost as the subway or bus, getting to Midtown, in less time than it currently takes, and with less headaches, really increasing quality of life. The other, another model would be somebody who may live in Brooklyn who works in Long Island City, who lives in the Dumbo area, who's got a new neat job in the innovation economy, who's going to now hop on that ferry and come up, have a lovely, cup of coffee on the ferry, and get to work completely intact without any sweat or muss or fuss. So that's really the vision here, and it's already been working, and we want to expand it into Queens. One thing I'd also like to point out is, in terms of demand for ferries, this is a great story, because when the East River ferry service got started, there was a lot of construction going on in Hunters Point South, and with the park and and the new buildings going in there. So we were all holding our breath to see what would happen when that construction finally ended, and it is really mind-blowing. So while ridership on East River Ferry grew by 13% over about the last 2 years, in Hunters Point South it grew 65%. once the construction was finished. So it really is, and it right now ranks as one of the highest ridership locations in the system. So that's why we think a new stop in Long Island City North is really warranted, because it's far enough away from the Hunters Point South stop, and it really puts you at the centroid of a lot of density and a lot of people who have journeys to work throughout the city. So so it's very exciting. We are looking forward to work with New York State Parks on that new landing location there, while we also are mindful of new development that's going on just to the north in Annabelle Basin. So my last word is tomorrow is a big day for us, because we will be receiving the bids from operators for the ferry service. And that means that a bunch of us in the office will be very busy for the next few weeks evaluating those proposals. So lots of good news on ferries.
All right, good. Maybe we'll circle back and talk about the state parks and how you're going to manage that issue. So maybe, Danny, could you tell us a bit how hopefully the bike share program is going to enhance the ferry service, actually, in addition to doing other things in Long Island City?
Good morning. So there are a ton of really exciting things, I think, also going on with bike share in the city right now as well. And I think it really does fit very well with the ferry program, and it fits well with a lot of the different transit. And I'll talk about a little bit of that in a minute. I think the first thing I want to say is that City Bike launched in May of 2013. It was not as flawless of a launch as we would have perhaps wanted. That said, people sort of took to it right away and started to really embrace the bike as a new way to get around New York City. We have had to date over 18 million trips at this point, and over 30 million miles traveled using City Bike. And this is in a city where when we first launched, the headlines were that no one was going to use it, or that if people used it, it was going to be sort of mass chaos and some sort of bloodbath. That has proven very much to not be the case. You see people dressed very much like all of you out on the bikes riding through Midtown Manhattan every day. And we are very excited to finally be at the phase where we can start expanding the program. We had new leadership come in and basically take over not just City Bike, but 10 of the largest bike share systems throughout the country last October. And our new president and CEO is someone who is familiar to many people in the room. His name is Jay Walder. He had formerly been the head of the New York City MTA and had gone to Hong Kong to run the MTR there. And he's really brought experience and leadership to this. And we have new investors who actually come from real estate development and also from the health and wellness community that have really helped bring some really great business sensibility to the system as well, and really helped us think about how we were going to grow, not just throw stations down and grow, but really what we needed to do to be prepared for what is a doubling of the system size. So we really took the winter and made a lot of investment in improving City Bike and improving the way that it was working for our existing customers to really build a strong foundation from which we could grow. So in March, we basically swapped out the software that powers the back end of the City Bike system to increase its reliability for our customers, but also to give us as operators more insight and visibility into what was going on in the system to allow us to measure and manage it more effectively. We replaced the equipment in all of 12,000 docking points and all of our 330 existing stations, again, to increase reliability for our customers. And Sam and I were just chatting about how he has noticed the improvement, which I'm very glad to hear, but really to make it a smoother experience when you're docking and undocking a bike. And for people who are accessing the system using a casual pass, to make it an easier system for them to get the ride codes that they use to access the system. All of this lays the groundwork from which we will be comfortable going forward with expansion. And so some people, and even in the few minutes that I've been here this morning, coming up to me asking like, when is it coming? When is it coming? We wanted to make sure that all of this stuff was totally solid before we committed to a date for expansion. We are in the process now of doing some final testing of some of the equipment that we'll be using for expansion. Again, I think it is a credit to Jay and his experience that he brings from the transit industry that he really wants a rigorous testing protocol for all of the equipment that we're putting out on the streets. That said, we will be coming to Long Island City later this year. which is, I think, super exciting. So our expansion will start with the neighborhoods that were supposed to be covered originally during our original launch, which include more of Bed-Stuy, Williamsburg, Greenpoint, and Long Island City. There'll be 92 new stations put in, 11 of which will be in Long Island City. And I think that this is going to be a great first step to bringing City Bike to Queens, and to a new borough, and to a borough that I think can use the extra transportation option. I think this is going to help people do a better job of connecting to great transit options, be they the ferry or the subway, or making short trips across between Brooklyn and Queens, two neighborhoods right now that are linked by transit, but sometimes it feels like a tenuous link, or a less reliable link. And I think that City Bike helps just provide another layer. We are serving on our peak days somewhere around 50,000 trips. Obviously, that will grow as we have more stations and more bikes out there on the road. We are nowhere near the level of what the MTA serves, but we think that we are a very good complement to that kind of transit that exists in New York City. And we see that in our cities that we service all across the country, from New York to DC to Chicago, that people are really using bike share as a complement to transit and as a way to get to and from transit, and as a way to serve trips that were formerly too complicated or too long by transit. And so I think that that's sort of the role that it will start to play here in Long Island City. We also see that people have been using bikes more and more just to get out and explore neighborhoods and kind of unlock more of what New York has to offer. And I think that that is also a huge potential here in Long Island City for people to come over and say, like, okay, I have a City Bike membership. Like, maybe I will come in and check out some of the museums in Long Island City. It doesn't seem so far, and it doesn't seem so hard to get between them because I'm not going to have to be continuously hopping into the subway. I'll just bike between them, and it's, a 10-minute bike ride between some of these great places that are here, from PS1 to the Sculpture Park to the Noguchi, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that's also a really exciting potential for bike share as well, for the recreational and kind of interborough tourism aspect of it as well. So overall, we are excited. We are coming. We'll be announcing an expansion date very soon, and it will be this year that we will finally get to meet our neighbors in Queens.
Great. Everybody's waiting. So Ryan, DOT handles both the traffic and the street safety improvements. Can you tell us some of the work that's been going on here in Long Island City?
Sure. Good morning. My water. So New York City Department of Transportation, as many of you know, we're really responsible for all of the space between the buildings, the sidewalks, the streets, the traffic signals, the markings, the crosswalks, all of those things. And just want to talk a bit about how we're thinking about Long Island City and how we want to serve this community and what is happening. First of all, my division is in the heritage, as Sam can speak to, was we were our own city agency, and we were headquartered in Long Island City at what Sam reminded me was Bridge Plaza North and is now known as Queens Plaza North. And the Pan Am building. Yes, which was formerly the Pan Am building. So we have a historic role. We have our civil engineers who approve all of the roadway geometry in our traffic management center in Long Island City at what we now call 2811 Queens Plaza North. So we're really members of the community here. And, the sort of, as we see the change happening in Long Island City and how we want to participate, first would be around sort of the public realm and how we manage the street space. We think there is great demand for pedestrian-friendly streets that connect the different areas and neighborhoods in Long Island City, and we've partnered with the Department of City Planning in cases to approve and allow for things like the Queens Plaza reconstruction, which added a protected bike path connecting to the Queensboro Bridge, and pedestrian improvements in landscaping and public space. We reviewed and approved and contributed to the Jackson Avenue streetscape project. We've been working with the local community on planning and building a neighborhood cycling network that the new City Bike cyclists, as well as the longtime cyclists and people who want to get on bikes, can use to circulate to through Long Island City and connect to the ferry services. So I think for us, the tension is Of course, it's a historically quite a congested street system in terms of traffic. Balancing those trade-offs for us in terms of, traffic can be so incredibly frustrating for people. And when you see a lane become a planted median, when you see road space that was sort of previously undefined become a bike lane, it can sort of say, well, what are they thinking? Does this really fit in? Does this really make sense? And I think what really I would want to say about that is, with the investment in City Bike and bringing that to Long Island City, with the ferry system and with the development, we really have the potential to improve mobility for all the users, including all of the industry, all of the business, and the residents who do have to get around by motor vehicle. To the extent that there are lots of trips that really don't work for transit or require a transfer, and City Bike Share will allow you to go right to Queens Plaza and get the train you want, and just taking a small amount of trips that you would take, that you would Uber or taxi or choose to drive, really there's straws that can break the camel's back here in terms of our mobility and our congestion. So it doesn't have to be an overwhelming amount of trips that we encourage to happen by bus, walking, cycling, to really maintain and enhance all of the circulation that's needed in Long Island City. What we don't want is sort of, I think, what we did in the past, which is much more auto-centric type development and sort of reacting to the congestion that we see on the streets with, removing parking so that we create another moving lane in the rush hours, those sorts of things, widening intersections, making them less safe. One of the things I'd like to sort of highlight that I think is emblematic of our approach are the changes we made a good number of years ago now at the foot of the Pulaski Bridge. I think that's really reflective of our approach, which basically what you had was, an intersection that needed to move traffic and trucks between Queens and Brooklyn and two somewhat industrial areas. And with a heavy turn onto the bridge, sort of the old practice was that why let pedestrians cross in front of that bridge and make them go in a 250-foot U-shape around. And what we had was, condominium and residential development on one side of the bridge and the entrance to the 7 train on the other. We also had the bus route that brings people from Greenpoint over to Long Island City to transfer to the 7, stopping on one side and then asking those pedestrians to walk in that 250-foot U
Right.
around the intersection. And what we said was, that's really not something a New Yorker will do. They're going to take the shortest distance between the two paths. And what we can really do is make that intersection a proud gateway for Long Island City, as opposed to, in essence, a traffic sewer. And so we did, whatever we could with signals and our street engineering toolbox, islands, landscaping, and we provide that crossing now for people either going from the new development to the 7 or the bus to the 7, or just wanting to walk in and connect to the waterfront. So that's really emblematic of our approach, and I think what I'm interested in today is discussing that more, hearing more about where those next places are, where we need to sort of work together to stitch the communities of Long Island City together.
All right, that's terrific, because your work is really important and it's been really impressive. So Sam, tell us about Move New York. Tell us about congestion. We just heard that important word.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, everything that I've heard is really going to be very helpful for Long Island City. I think the ferries are going to be helpful. Bike share, big fan of bike share. In fact, I bike on ferries, and I'm working on a book of biking on ferries.
Okay.
And what Ryan is talking about is just so important if this is going to be a community, in order to make it a better walking environment, biking environment, transit environment. But there's a real threat to all of that. And I started my career 45 years ago at the foot of the Queensboro Bridge when it was called Bridge Plaza. And there was a move in the 70s to change that to Queens Plaza because Long Island City did not want to be seen as the plaza to the bridge. And that's all Long Island City was being seen as by many people. Well, sad to say, you've become more of a plaza to the bridge than ever before. And the Queensboro Bridge is the only bridge that has no toll in the world that is sandwiched between two toll crossings, the Triborough Bridge and the Midtown Tunnel. Every single day, 40,000 cars, trucks, buses leave highways to go on city streets. And those are the city streets of Long Island City. They're hopping off the Long Island Expressway at Van Dam Street. If we were flying over right now, you'd see the road straight ahead on the LIC clear, and you'd see all the traffic coming on Van Dam to snake through Sunnyside and Long Island City. You'd see the traffic coming down Crescent Street. You'd see it coming on Queens Boulevard and Northern Boulevard and 21st Street, and really overloading your streets. They don't belong here. They're here because of a mistake made in 1911. When the 4 East River bridges were opened, every single bridge had a toll on it. The Brooklyn, Manhattan, Williamsburg, and 1909, the Queensboro Bridge. Mayor William Gaynor removed the tolls from the Queensboro Bridge and from the other bridges. And as a result, you have now a $15 cash round trip for people using the toll crossings, just a mile to the south or 2 miles to the north, $11 and change Easy Pass, or they could use the Queensboro Bridge. I put free in quotes because in the 1980s, due to lack of money, nearly every part of that bridge was crumbling and we had to close a number of roadways on that bridge. Somebody pays for it. So if you think it's a free bridge, it is not a free bridge. But you're paying for it, you in Long Island City, in lives. These are high crash locations, both sides of the Queensboro Bridge, in air quality, in time lost, in a real threat to your development. When I looked at those pictures of all the development in Long Island City, that's going to bring more cars, and now we have another threat, the Ubers and the Lyfts, which are just adding a lot of vehicle miles traveled. And I know Google invested in Uber to create Goober, which will be driverless cars throughout the area. So there are real threats. This could be corrected. The Move New York plan, it's different than the Bloomberg plan, which ringed and had congestion pricing. We lower the tolls on 5 Queens bridges that have absolutely nothing to do with the central business district, including the Triborough, the Whitestone, the Throgs Neck, the Gil Hodges Bridge, the Cross Bay Boulevard Bridge. We reintroduce the tolls at the Queensboro Bridge and the other East River bridges and make them equal to what people are paying at the Midtown Tunnel and at the Triborough Bridge. As a result, there is no more bridge shopping. For a trucker, it could be $60 to $80 and soon to be $100 round trip to use one of the toll crossings, but zero to use the Queensboro Bridge. And that's why you see an extra 40,000 vehicles a day. Queensboro Bridge is at 180,000 vehicles a day or more. It should be at 140,000 if you just look at origins and destinations of the traffic. You're paying a dear price for it. So I hope for Long Island City, I don't think there's any community that benefits more from the Move New York plan than Long Island City.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. And now, Mike, to you, representing the state. You know, from the bridges to the tunnels to the airports, the state has an unusually high level of involvement, really, here in the inner workings of Long Island City. And I know you've worked certainly, you know, with us on our buses, which has been terrific. And so, what are the major issues would you like to see addressed?
Well, thank you, and good morning. I think the one way I would take a broad view of this is to say that everyone up here is a very good person who's helped to make things better and has ideas to make it even better still. But you take all of this that you just heard, and it's still not enough. And that's the problem I think that the people in Long Island City are facing. Growth is great. We love growth. And you see it happening. We're probably one of the fastest growing neighborhoods in all of New York. But the growth has to be intelligent and has to be coupled with infrastructure. So we're here to talk about the transportation aspect of it. It also spills over into schools and education and hospitals and so on. But let's stay focused on the transportation aspect of it right now. a lot of what you heard here, I'll put Sam to the side because his is really a unique solution to an interesting problem. But a lot of what you heard is ancillary, right? The real problem is not here with us today, it's the MTA. And particularly the 7 train. As you get over into the business area, Queensboro Plaza, Court Square, there's enough lines running through those areas that the stress on the system from all this growth is dispersed among the different lines. But it'll get there as more buildings go up. Really, your friends and neighbors in Hunters Point are the canaries in the coal mine here. And what they're dealing with as it relates to the 7 line is unbearable, as it is. Never mind that if you look at the map in the program, all those little dots represent 100 units that are coming in there. Tens of thousands of people will be added onto that system in the coming years, onto a system that already can't handle it. So the MTA is doing some signal work that'll improve the efficiency. We get it. The bike share is terrific. That'll help alleviate some pressure. The ferries are terrific. That'll alleviate some of the pressure. But we're really tinkering around the edges with a problem that's going to manifest itself in the medium and long term. And I don't know that anyone has expressed the vision to deal with that going forward. Sam's plan is interesting. I've not taken an official position on it, as Sam knows. A lot of the elected officials in Queens have reacted angrily towards it. I have not done so. I want to give them a chance to make their case. Won't be something that's voted on this session because this session technically ended last week. I've got to scramble up to finish after this panel, and hopefully we'll get done this week. But I want to give Sam and his team the opportunity to make a case in the next few months about why this is actually good for the people of Queens. The idea that some of the surrounding tolls will be decreased as the central business district crossings will be increased is a concept I want to let him take to the community and see how they respond. But if he's successful, if cars get off the road, which I think is a good thing for the environment and for congestion and for a lot of reasons, that is even more people being added to the mass transit system. So what are we going to do? No one's talking about the massive cost that would be associated going forward with new tracks, new lines, something that would increase the capacity of the subway system. But the growth is here not only in Long Island City, but the city can tell you they're looking at Sunnyside Yards, which raises a whole host of other interesting questions that we're not here to deal with today. Flushing is growing, right? These are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people added on the spine of the 7 line. So what are we going to do about that? And I think this is a great group. The Long Island City Partnership is tasked with thinking about the future of this neighborhood. And I would say one thing we need to do is start thinking what's going to happen 10 and 20 years down the road when these lines simply cannot handle the people. Some of them will get onto the ferries. That'll help. Some of them will get on the bike shares. That'll help. But we really have a massive problem that is looming, and I don't know that anyone's thinking about it that way. The MTA is struggling to fill the existing plan, which doesn't have any proposals to deal with the capacity problem in Western Queens. $14 billion hole that a lot of us in the state budget time voted against the state budget precisely because it didn't have any funding to help the MTA plug the gap. Well, not any, had very little, minimal funding to help plug that massive gap that the MTA is dealing with. So I would say, and if I could make a recommendation going forward, perhaps next year we should have a panel specifically dealing with the looming capacity crisis we're going to have here. That's my primary concern as it deals with transportation. The other one is something David had mentioned and other people had touched on. We need to start thinking about connecting Queens to other boroughs without having to travel through Manhattan to get there. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right? Queens is now a destination, not only Long Island City, but Astoria, Sunnyside. There's restaurants, there's cultural attractions, there's parks. People are coming here. Brooklyn is as well. People from Brooklyn want to get to Queens. People from Queens want to get to Brooklyn. The G train is inadequate. Bike share, again, will help. The ferries will help. But we need to find ways to get people back and forth and make it easy to do so. We'd had some great work with the Q103 on Vernon Boulevard, increasing the who's that, Sheila? Thanks, Sheila. Allowing people to get up and down both to our waterfront parks and to our cultural institutions along the waterfront. We did some work between Sunnyside and Greenpoint with the B24 and in terms of the bus service increasing. But we really need to start rethinking the future of the city and how people get around and where they're going. It's not simply, we're no longer a place where people come to put their heads at night and then wake up and get into Manhattan. And the system for too long has been thought of that way. And I think the vision of the agencies responsible are, for my taste, too reactive instead of visionary or more visionary. And this administration has done great work. The ferries is definitely a visionary plan, as is a bike share. But we need to start thinking more about where the future is going and not wait for the stress on the system to reveal itself before we take measures to deal with it. We know Long Island City is going to grow. So we should start thinking about ways to deal with that now, not wait until you can't physically fit another person on a train before we take measures to deal with it. So those are my thoughts on it, and I'm committed at the state level to doing what we can to help with the problem. I'm one voice up there, but I like to think I'm a loud voice, and so we'll do what we can on our side.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, the MTA, that is another issue. And I think that MTA was avoided on the panel because it's so inflammatory, the whole conversation of the 7 train, that nobody else would get a chance to speak about anything because, we know how that goes. I mean, I know in this, the Western Queens transit study that's been done, is talk about doing some bus. We do need buses or some light rail. We need something going between Queens and Brooklyn, because that's traffic. You're absolutely right. There's no reason to have to go into the city when a lot of traffic is just going to go between these 2 areas, and that may even increase, once the Technion is open. And also, I guess there is some talk about reopening the G stop, making it go further as it used to go, but I don't know what will happen about that. I guess a lot of this comes down to subsidies, really. And that's the one thing about the bike share and the ferry. I mean, how heavily subsidized are those? Suppose the subsidies go away, then what happens? Like if we have new administration comes in and they don't want to subsidize ferries. All right, so how do we answer? What do we do about that? I mean, how do we open for anybody? Yeah.
I think the first thing to point out is that the subsidy for the ferries is quite low. It's commensurate with other forms of transit, particularly closest probably to buses, to regular buses. And by bringing the fare down, actually, or bringing the fare pegged to the subway, it helps to ensure that we have robust ridership, and that's the way we want to do it. So we can still be on the same level in terms of subsidy with the other forms of transit that we know well.
So when you get on the ferry and you pay the $275, if you have a pass, can you then get on the bus?
Oh, not
yet. Not yet. Okay, so you have another fare. Okay, all right.
Yeah, and right now, bike share is actually entirely privately funded. Sponsorship and private investment have funded the capital costs of the program. Membership dues cover the operating costs, and so we're actually running without a subsidy, which does allow us to scale. In the future, there is this idea of a phase 3 expansion and pushing the system out further, and we're exploring creative different ways to approach that. There's a possibility that public money might be a part of it. It's also the possibility, and we've had interest from developers already in the Long Island City area for private real estate developers to say, like, I want this near my building. This is a good investment for us and for the mobility of the people who live or work in my building. And I think that there's opportunity there. Bike share has that kind of flexibility and scalability and adaptability in the ways that neighborhoods are evolving and changing. And Long Island City looks radically different than it did 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, if you were planning the system, you would have been like, yeah, maybe we'll probably skip that. Like, it's pretty industrial. Like, I don't know. Like for bike share. And now, like, of course, like it's a no-brainer. There's so many people that are living and working here. It makes total sense to have bike share. And who knows, like in another 10 years where that neighborhood is going to be. But the nice thing about bike share is that it, you don't have to wait for the capital program of the MTA to catch up and all of the planning that needs to be done to create a new subway line. You can do the planning process fairly rapidly, and you can iterate from there, and you can really help meet new demand as it grows. And at the moment, we're doing that without public funding.
Yeah, if I can add, and I should have mentioned, in the Move New York plan, it raises about $1.5 billion a year. Some of it is through the rearrangement of tolls. Some of it is a surcharge on taxi cabs, which the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Board of Trade supports, and some other fees that would be included. But there's about over $1 billion for transit a year, which could be bonded at about $15 billion, which plugs the transit hole, and we have about $375 million for roads and bridges. We need that money. There's almost no money for roads and bridges right now in New York City, and you can see that on a lot of the major roads. But in terms of what could be done for Long Island City, you hit upon a few of them. The G train, when I lived in Brooklyn and worked in Long Island City, the G train went all the way to Queens Plaza and even went beyond that for a while. And it was an 8-car train, not a 4-car train, and that could certainly increase capacity tremendously. You talked about a streetcar or some transportation along the waterfront, the Brooklyn-Queens waterfront, which a number of people are working on, including myself. The Regional Plan Association, I'm a board member, has a project called the Triborough RX, which uses rail right-of-way to connect Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. And an early version of the Move New York plan had a pedestrian bridge that went from Greenpoint to Hunters Point to Roosevelt Island
Oh, that'd be great.
to Manhattan. And we've got to start thinking, we have not built a bridge from to the Central Business District since 1909. Cities across the world are building pedestrian bike bridges. We've got to catch up. We should have it from Long Island City, we should have it from Brooklyn, and we should have it from New Jersey connecting with Midtown Manhattan.
Oh, I like that idea. Anybody comments on that? Okay, and so let's talk maybe about some of the challenges of bringing what we are that's presently in the works, like some challenges that the ferry is facing now with
Well, one thing before I hit on that
Okay,
topic is
sure.
just to add to what the panelists are saying, that you know, what's so wonderful about ferries is that they're inherently scalable. You know, they're easy to install, they're redundant, you know, they add resiliency in the system. We saw after Hurricane Sandy their ability to be turned on very quickly, like within a few
that's
days.
true.
And I think we should always keep that. Of course, they serve the waterfront, so there's always the inland connection that's key. But with all these great ideas here, I think we can get inland. You know, one of the challenges certainly that we face in Long Island City north is compatibility with the park, and that's how, you know, we have ferry landings in other parks, most notably Brooklyn Bridge Park and Governor's Island and Hudson River Park. So I think that's where we have to work closely with state parks to get it right. We don't want to disturb peace and quiet, but we at the same time you know, recognize that ferries are fun to watch, they're fun to ride, and when they actually really have a very light touch when it comes to their presence on the waterfront, and they help to enliven the waterfront as well. So I think one challenge is certainly that siting of the facilities at Astoria as well, Astoria Cove and Howlett's, where we're working closely with DOT. Working with New York City Housing Authority to locate a ferry landing there as well. And it's different, you know, people aren't used to having ferries in their backyard, so you have to educate people. And so I think we're going to be doing a lot of robust outreach with our team to make sure people understand the benefits of ferries and what to expect when a ferry comes to their neighborhood.
All right, there's that unknown, yeah. Anybody want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I would just say, I was talking with Andrew earlier about the gantry proposal, and with due respect to my colleagues in the state bureaucracy, I think of all the entities who are involved in Long Island City, state parks is not the most terribly aware of what the community needs and what's been going on. We've had a number of interactions with them in the past about different things. So I'm committed to working with the city and with the community, most of all, to move that proposal forward, assuming the community wants it there, and we still have some discussions to have. But we shouldn't let bureaucracy get in the way of progress on something like that, and I agree with that. One thing I want to mention, a little bit off topic, but as long as I got DOT here, it was on my mind. And it actually affects everything we're talking about, because if we want to alleviate stress, we want to get cars off the road, etc. We've had some minor progress with you folks on this, but in Sunnyside and the Sunnyside Long Island City border, the parking plan, such as it is too facilitative of people commuting to that neighborhood, dropping their cars off and getting on the train. It's completely unnecessary. We shouldn't be facilitating people from Long Island avoiding the LIRR so they could drive to Queens Boulevard, park under the 7 for 10 hours, and hop on the train and get into Manhattan. It's been a problem for a while. The neighborhood is not a parking lot. It's there for the residents and the businesses to get around and to do and to ply their trade. So something to take back with you. It would help get cars off the road. It would help alleviate the burden on the 7, I think, as well.
Actually, I think that's actually a really good idea in terms of turnover. I think we would have to sort of determine, we allow long-term paid parking under the viaduct in Sunnyside. I think there's probably a good amount of local folks who go to jobs or the community college or sort of taking advantage of that and not just transferring and hopping onto the 7, but it's worth absolutely looking at because we could use a time restriction, which would create the turnover, which would be more about visitors. I think that's a great avenue to explore.
It's not, I don't think those spots, I don't want to get off topic here, but I don't think those spots are intended to be a parking lot for people, right? Or for the city to act as their daily parking lot. And the local businesses on Queens Boulevard certainly don't want it because they want to see the turnover to keep the customers coming and going. But we could talk about it another time.
All right. Are there any immediate plans for bike share on Roosevelt Island? No. Okay. Not at this point. Okay, fine. All right. So
just, if I could just talk a little bit about Sunnyside and the connections, a couple things. Again, in that balance we have, in that tension, and I think you all are going to have to participate in this in terms of prioritizing traffic flow versus access. We had rush hour regulations in the morning to sort of push traffic through Sunnyside to the Sunnyside Bridge, over the yards to Queens Plaza, and we took that away to provide more parking for the local businesses, and we want to keep doing things like that. And then, of course, this is a little bit beyond the geography, but we need to mention our signature Vision Zero project, which is our redesign of Queens Boulevard, which we'll be kicking off this July, which will really extend the protected bike lane network that we start at the Queensboro Bridge, go through Queens Plaza, go over the Sunnyside Bridge, use 43rd and Skillman to get through the lovely Sunnyside area, and then Queens Boulevard itself. So some of these issues we talk about, Sam talks about the bridges. The non-motorized path for the Queensboro Bridge is effectively 10 feet wide, and it's carrying all the runners, all the walkers, and all the cyclists going to the Central Business District. And if any of you actually do take that, that's actually getting overcrowded and is on the verge of being a real safety concern of having cyclists who go down a hill in 5 feet of space with lots of runners and walkers. So that's something we are starting to think about and to connect to the other plans.
I should add a thank you to them since I'm being relatively critical. But thank you to the DOT because someone, I think Sam had mentioned the accident rate on the Queensboro Bridge, particularly on the outer roadway late at night. We had multiple deaths due to the construction there. We worked with DOT. We got that outer roadway closed to vehicular traffic in the nighttime hours and overnight hours, and we have not had a single repeat incident since. So we appreciate it.
That's great. Yeah. All right, so I think we'll open up to questions. Okay, hi.
Hi, I run the Noguchi Museum, which is in the northern part of Long Island City, and transportation is a huge issue for us and for our visitors. I'm interested and appreciative that you're thinking of putting a ferry in the Astoria houses, but had you thought, just as you spoke about the strangeness of people having to make a big U at the end of the Pulaski Bridge, that really the connector for people is at Broadway. So if you're down in the Astoria houses, and I'm just saying, you know, you're a person that's on a certain income and you're $2.50 to go to the ferry, and then you have to go to bus, so all of a sudden it's $10 for your transportation. You know there's going to be a high, like a Battery Park City in the middle of there, which I'm sure is also part of the reason to accommodate it. But it would seem that if there's a way to connect the ferry and the existing buses, that might be something that could be more beneficial to many people, particularly that 7 train, which is the one point in and out. So, not the 7, the N, QN is what I'm trying to say. So I just would ask you to think about that.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I think the next step after establishing, or while we're establishing landings, we're planners, so we're going to be working with DOT. We'll be working with the MTA. The MTA has been very cooperative on building or recognizing the ferry system and making connections. They're very eager to work with us, and it'd be wonderful to have that conversation and to include you in that as well.
Thank you.
Nice. Hi, sir.
Yes, Tom Pino. I'm a resident in Huntington Point. We heard a lot about the Queensboro Bridge and the congestion on the bridge, but we live with the sad commentary that in 2015 it transports fewer people than when it was first built. So you can't restore the trolleys, but there are the elevators in the anchorages. Why aren't those getting restored so we can accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians because of all that high-dense building that's right at the waterfront, those elevators could accommodate people. Right now, the people staying in the hotels are going a half a mile inland to go back onto the bridge to go into Manhattan. So are we considering restoring the elevators?
Yeah, I would say we're not asked to do that every day, and if that's something that becomes a priority, like what Sam was talking about and with the MTA, there's obviously, we have issues. We have 796 or so roadway bridges, which we are struggling to keep safe and up. Bridges need maintenance and carry trucks and steel cracks and all those sorts of things. So if there is a change in the dynamic in the funding environment, you know, the when you can't do the basics, when you can't keep the potholes filled or the roads paved, the things that are seen somewhat more amenity-like, restoring an elevator to the bridge or a new pedestrian and bicycle facility along the waterfront, those sorts of things, they're harder to justify. And that's, I think, part of the reason why the city bike system is unsubsidized in that sense, and that we've been dealing in a very fiscally constrained environment. But I think that the community, we're very responsive, and you know, to the extent this becomes an issue that the community raises, I think that would help move that forward.
If I get someone from Cornell texting on to ask you, does that help?
Hi. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm a resident of Town Square.
Okay.
And I am quite surprised today to see that we are talking about transportation problems when we are aware for a while that 5 Points, for example, is going to have 700 rental apartments. Rock Rose has a big tower, 2 big buildings coming up, and the E-train is absolutely saturated. I think 7 train works quite well, actually. But the E-train and the M train, it's just insane. You have to let 4 trains passing before. And I'm surprised that we are here sitting talking about that when you have all those permits deposited. So you guys are here to anticipate what's coming. So how come we are facing that situation now? And how are we going to really manage to feed the supply and the demand, basically, of this massive amount of people coming? And the transportation is not there.
I guess for me, I agree with you. I think the city's done a terrible job overall in anticipating what has gone on in Brooklyn with the L train, which you're seeing with the E train, which you're going to see with the 7, and you're already seeing with it. And we really need to start on some long-range planning. The MTA has a gap of $14 billion of just maintaining pretty much and continuing on its programs, which is very little for Long Island City in particular. It's a reason that I've been pushing the Move New York plan. It is a plan, and it has some long-range funding plans, working with the real estate community, and I know the real estate community is very active in Long Island City in providing transportation, but I think the government is doing some things, but it's not enough. I think the ferries are absolutely terrific, but ferries and bike share are a few percentage points.
That's right.
They're never going to be the 60 to 80 that you need out of a transit system to have the kind of central business district. You're going to have a central business and residential district that's going to probably be 3rd or 4th in the country in size. And you need the kind of transit system that reflects that. And I don't see that kind of planning going on. And that's why I think I'm asking for Long Island City and downtown Brooklyn and Williamsburg and the whole city to support plans like Move New York.
Hi.
My question is, I guess, more specific for Ryan and Andrew, and it actually relates to Mr. Pano's suggestion, and just suggestions in general. Are your departments taking steps to make it easier for businesses and residents to have their suggestions heard without going through, months and months of bureaucracy before the discussion can get started?
Well, I mean, I would say at my agency, we are built to be responsive. The 311 system really changed things, you know, over a decade ago. We have an write the commissioner form on our website. We track and have to close out every case. We get, you know, tens of thousands of service requests from street lights, traffic signals, faded markings, potholes. We have a whole infrastructure of borough commissioners offices who are there. We are constantly engaging. We have 59 community boards. We go to their transportation committees. We're out talking about our projects and the services we offer all over the city pretty much every night of the week. You know, we're a democracy. Your elected officials are you know, higher up on the food chain than a 311 request. So if you call 311 and ask for the elevators to be reopened on the Queensboro Bridge, a $25 million capital project, that's not how it works. You can call 311 and get your pothole filled, but if you want a bridge over the Newtown Creek between Greenpoint and Long Island City, it's, you know, making it this guy's top priority, frankly.
Yeah, I would just echo that our door is always open. You know, a lot of people don't realize this. You wouldn't know this, but some of the suggestions for ferry landings that we're implementing came from average people who just wrote to the 311 system and suggested locations. I kid you not. So we are very open at EDC to members of the public. Give us your suggestions, and, you know, happy to talk to you after this panel. I
also just want to say that, you know, Long Island City Partnership, we have a transportation committee, and we encourage people to join the partnership and to partake and help us out, because more participation is better for us and to help us to actually influence change. So that's something. David?
Yeah, not to pick on Ryan. You do a good job. The Queensboro Bridge has a lot of ramping, circular ramping tentacles all throughout our wonderful neighborhood. They sometimes provide areas of refuge for weeds and a lot of trash and not such great conditions for the area. I know that there are people that would love to see those upgraded. There's monies to be spent by developers who are developing on either side of those ramps. In the New York Times today, Lower East Side, they're talking about using solar panel and actually bringing light under the ramps and creating gardens and park space. Is the DOT starting to investigate trying to upgrade those ramp conditions?
Yeah. Actually, in the news last week, we did a partnership with the Design Trust for Public Space, in which a program called Under the Elevated, in which we worked with them to develop an inventory of all of these sort of forgotten spaces. And really, the vision is to turn them from sort of an eyesore to an asset. That they're real. That there's tremendous opportunities there. And I think, again, in a resource-constrained environment, it's tough to always, you know, trim the weeds at the steel footing under the bridge. But in these changing communities, I think there are tremendous opportunities, and we've done projects like that. We have a tunnel up in Inwood that leads to a dark, dank tunnel that leads to a subway station that we just had a bunch of a process where we selected artists and painted wonderful art with volunteers along that tunnel. So we have programs like that under urban art and under the L that we can reclaim those spaces, and we love doing that kind of work.
All right, great. I think we have time for one more question.
Sam, this is addressed to you, okay, and anybody else who wants to chime in. I think the notion of non-vehicular bridges that are connecting different parts, it doesn't have to be borough to borough, it can be within the borough. Have you looked at, you know, simple things, like I'll call them very simple tensile structures, suspension bridges. For example, from Austell Place area, you know, which is looking to become a new tech kind of area, over to the other side, across the Sunnyside Yards at the narrow throat of the Sunnyside Yards. I mean, it's something I suggested to the administration to look at, to connect these things, okay, that, you know, if they develop the Sunnyside Yards later, God bless, you know, you'll have a real walking connection, you know, everywhere. Have you looked at the efficacy of doing anything like that in, you know, for the next 10 or 15 years until they get their act together with Amtrak, MTA, New York City DOT, and whatever other agency you want to think of to cover that particular rail yard.
Yeah, I think 10 to 15 years is optimistic. They were looking at it back when I was traffic commissioner in the 1980s. I haven't looked at that specifically, but I think those are the really good ideas that we should be looking at to improve pedestrian circulation. We have walls created by the rail yards and others that now that we are encouraging walking and biking more, we should look at spanning some of these locations. And as you know, I think we should have another span that goes from Brooklyn into Hunters Point, and we should have another span that connects Hunters Point to Roosevelt Island and Technion, and then a span that connects to where the FDR Drive used to have an outboard road during construction that I did some 25 or 30 years ago. We actually have the piles in place for that. So, and as I said, places across the world are doing pedestrian bridges like crazy. From London to Tokyo to Chicago has some gorgeous pedestrian bridges. I think it's time New York started to add pedestrian bridges to its toolbox of transportation.
I just want to add to that. I didn't realize we'd be talking so much about non-motorized bridges, but I just want to mention we are in the process of wrapping up a protected bike lane on the J.J. Byrne Greenpoint Avenue Bridge between Sunnyside and Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Really exciting bicycle network connection, a place where we had signs that telling cyclists to stop, dismount, and walk your bike, and that's a movable bridge. And then we have the project you're probably familiar with, which will create a bicycle path, a dedicated bicycle path on the Pulaski Bridge between Greenpoint and Long Island City, which we're tremendously excited about the current condition. Again, there's a non-motorized path that has light structures and pinch points and all sorts of, and a lot of tension being raised between cyclists and pedestrians, and we'll be able to provide sort of double the non-motorized space there. So we might not be building, the new spans right now. We don't have those projects funded and on the books, but we are doing sort of making the most of the infrastructure that we have now.
All right, well, thank you to our panelists. It was really terrific. Thank you, audience. Sorry, we have to end.